Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, my friend Mr. Sessions, for the customary 30 minutes, and I really want to thank him because after what happened 2 weeks ago when we in the minority were denied any debate time on the rule or the underlying bill, that I know that being given the customary 30 minutes is no longer something we should automatically assume. And I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, let me begin by saying I rise in strong opposition to this rule. I'm going to rise in strong opposition to the rule that comes after this, and the one that comes after that. We're doing 3 rules today that would provide for the consideration of legislation on the separation of powers bill, this health savings account bill that they've put together, and a financial services bill. All 3 bills, I want my colleagues to know, are going nowhere. There are statements of administration policy on all 3 of these pieces of legislation saying the administration would veto them. Some of these bills are so bad, I'm not even sure the Senate will consider them. They're either press releases that were written in the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, or they're bills that are so loaded up with extraneous materials and riders on all kinds of subjects that have nothing to do with the underlying legislation, that, again, we're just sitting here debating bills that have no future, that are going nowhere. We're wasting the time of our colleagues. We're wasting taxpayer money. And what we should be debating here today, and you've heard from a series of my colleagues earlier, is legislation that would provide for comprehensive background checks on anybody who wants to buy a gun, and also on legislation that says that if you are on a FBI terrorist watch list and you cannot fly on an airplane, then you should not be allowed to go into a gun store and buy a weapon of war, or buy any gun for that matter. Those are the 2 pieces of legislation that we tried 2 weeks ago to get the Speaker of the House to give us a time to debate and a vote on them, and we're still demanding consideration of these 2 very basic, common-sense pieces of legislation that I believe will save lives in this country. And quite frankly, that's what we should be concerned with, how we better protect our constituents, how we better protect the American people. You know, the issue of gun violence is something that Democrats and Republicans alike care about. In fact, the 2 pieces of legislation that we want to bring to the floor are authored by a Republican member, the distinguished member from New York, Peter King. He's the prime author of both these pieces of legislation. But this problem is something that seems to worry the American people, trouble the American people, but doesn't seem to trouble the people who are in charge of this House. Listen to this statistic from PolitiFact. So many people die annually from gunfire in the United States that the death toll between 1968 and 2011 eclipses all wars ever fought by the country. There were about 1.4 million firearm deaths in that period, compared to 1.2 million U.S. deaths in every conflict from the War of Independence to Iraq. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, many of us came to this floor and joined with our colleague John Lewis, and with Catherine Clark and John Larson and Mike Thompson and so many others in a protest, in a sit-in. And the reason why we did that is because the frustration level on this side of the aisle is boiling over. This is supposed to be a deliberative body where important issues get debated and voted on. And instead, this has become a place where trivial issues get debated passionately and important ones not at all. I mean, in the aftermath of this terrible tragedy in Orlando, where 49 people were killed, all we could do in this House was have a moment of silence. That was it. And so that was what that protest was all about. That was what that sit-in was all about. We have exhausted every other way to try to get this legislation to the floor. And every time we try to go through regular order, we're blocked, we're blocked, we're blocked, we're blocked. Enough. I mean, the American people overwhelmingly support the no-fly, no-buy bill and universal background checks. And they're not going to fall for the theatrics that my Republican friends are now engaged in this week, which is to bring up an NRA written bill, which they're going to say is no-fly, no-buy, but what they're not going to tell you is that all the loopholes still exist. So it doesn't matter what this bill purports to do. You can still be on the terrorist watch list and go online and buy a gun. You can still be on the terrorist watch list and not be able to fly and go to a gun show and buy a gun. It's pathetic that the loopholes in the background checks in our laws continue to be unaddressed. And all we're trying to do is have our moment where we can debate this issue, which, again, is a bipartisan issue. It's not a partisan issue. Again, the two pieces of legislation that we want to bring to the floor are authored by a Republican member. So, Mr. Speaker, we are not going away. This issue is too important. We are not going to be silent. We're going to continue to use every means available to us to raise our voices and to demand that the leadership of this House respect not the wishes of the Democratic minority, but respect the wishes of the vast majority of the American people, Democrats and Republicans alike. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve my time.